2 weeks in a row with us. We made it. We did it. We have finished
with all three of us. It's always
yes. Well, yeah, that's what I meant with the full OGs. We have finished our college road tour this week. We wrapped up with South Carolina. It was great to bring that launchpad around, and just totally different experience for us and for the programs we work with. So excited to keep building on that, and also excited to be able to just settle at home and
to keep the launchpad in
at
one
home.
place.
One place.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it'd be nice to keep it here. I went to South Carolina and I told Laura I watched the woman, the suitcase was heavy, and I watched her just push it over on the thing, and I was like, it's all wrapped.
Yeah.
So we were just,
like where the graphics card got bent, right?
Yeah, I was like, oh, that woman just karate chopped that launch pad right onto that thing. Anyways, it made it mostly.
I drove it right to the facility on Wednesday and set that thing up. I'm like, you've made it.
Yes, we made it. All right, in that sort of vein, I guess, coming out of that, but also this idea that it's fall. One of the concepts we've been talking a lot about internally, kind of checking ourselves as coaches and how we sort of measure progress for an athlete and what that looks like. Conversations that come out of assessments, I think even at the college level, is that obviously when we say we're sort of like data-driven, data-informed, whatever insert word, buzzword that you want to use, it means that we measure whether an athlete is getting better 95% of the cases by is their data improving. And data, we know, not just arbitrary data that continues. We've talked many times about the way this continues to be iterated, but the data we know scales at the level that they're trying to go. So something like an exit velo, we know the harder you hit the ball, the more success you're going to have. Something like a pitch velocity, of course, but then also starting to get into the nuances of spin and what spin works and, those different concepts. So we are trying to influence data in most cases. There are exceptions to that, of course, where someone comes to us and they just have been in some really terrible cycle of pain, or they're coming back from an injury where we're not going to look at data. We're not going to focus on that. But in most cases, we're tied to the data. And so I think
performance data. Still working on their wellness data. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. So their performance data. So I think something that is interesting for us, it's always interesting when we bring new coaches in and, we have our interns but when you are working with athletes regularly, what we're also used to, and the athletes are also used to, is this sort of like feedback from the coach of how things look. That looked better, that looked smoother, to my eye, I liked XYZ, we're focused on load. And when you get too much in that loop, and the further you get away from the data in there, in my mind, the more easy it gets to be just living in some sort of bias, whether you mean to or not. It's just you think that looks smoother and your eye can't really absorb whether that's true.
It's also ridiculous. Yes, we need literally like high-speed cameras and biomechanics data to tell us if you're like rotating enough. But on the next pitch, our eye can do it. If our eye could do it, we would not have a biomechanics lab.
Right.
So the idea of even like giving an opinion and like giving your subjective thoughts on a pitch is also crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we had this conversation this week. We were talking through some hitters in our hitting department meeting, and some, we will use terms, and it's not bad to use these terms. So we'll say like, she's very rigid. She struggles with timing. Like there's these sort of things we say, and we have to, even internally, where we are, data is in every session, data is in HQ, we have all access. We have to internally kind of like pause and be like, what does that mean? When we say an athlete is rigid, what does that mean? What are you seeing? Can we get to the bottom of like, okay, that means XYZ. Now, how is that impacting her performance? What would we see if she became less rigid? What would we be trying to influence from that? And so it's those kind of biases. It's like, well, is a rigid athlete bad? Like, how do you know that that's bad? You see something with your eye that looks something. And so that's something we're always doing internally, is like, let's tie that back to something that's real, that we can measure, and not just like all of a sudden you're like, oh, that looks better. And not literally nothing has changed. She hasn't hit the ball harder. She hasn't swung the bat faster. Like we haven't had an influence on anything. And so we see this all the time, I think, both in parents' expectations, athlete expectations of what a training session is going to look like. They're like, well, did I even get better today? And meanwhile, we're like, yes, you literally in that session added 3 inches of sink on your drop ball. What do you mean, did you get better? But because it wasn't tied to this like validation from the coach of how it looked in mechanics, that feels off to them. So we see that. And I think in the college space, we see this sometimes where like, okay, we're in individuals and it feels like I should just like kind of sit on top of someone and give them feedback. And this is not to say that that's always wrong, because sometimes you are exploring like, we think your first move needs to change. So let's just like play with it for a second. What are some options? Like, this stance is too big for you or whatever it is. Like all of that is fine and part of coaching, but it's when you go then like weeks and you've never tested that against any data, and then you're saying you're validating it or saying good, bad. It's like based on what? And I think that's kind of, it's really questioning people to make sure that loop is tight with what are you actually trying to influence? Why is that load bad? And because it does what for her in her swing or whatever it is. And then how are you going to measure? What is that tied to? If you see that starting to change, what is the number that's going to be tied to that you're monitoring to make sure that you are actually doing sort of like what you think you're doing? And this is a really hard concept, I think, for coaches and athletes to stay that tied to it, because it is different. Although it seems like kind of crazy, it's different that we are measuring whether you get better by whether you get better. But it is different because better for so long, I mean, when we all played, better was just measured by if our coach told us it was better or not. I mean, it's just like, that was sort of how it got measured. So I don't know, Ash or Laura, if you guys have feedback on that.
Yeah, I was going to say it is two slightly different worlds at the youth level, meaning like high school level and college level, because it is a ground up approach at the youth level, meaning you're trying to identify how to make some of their ball flight data, their performance data better. So you're going after patterns, and what we spend our time is using HQ and watching trends and seeing if that's working. And that's kind of the end, because we don't have, it's not simply that we don't have in-game data, but it's not like we're then getting on calls with the travel ball coach and talking about their whiff rates and if the swing and misses went up and if this, we just get kind of some subjective feedback from the athletes of like if it was noticeable, right? But they don't really notice it if it's not a large like change. And also they're in an environment where probably their games they're under fatigue. So sometimes it's not always the best gauge. Like if they were just playing a single game a day or just a double header and it was more of a college setup, you could see some of these things come out a little bit more. So I do think it's more challenging to understand this concept.
Yeah, like, well, because we'll have athletes, we're so taught, when we're doing our jobs well. And again, I mean, I think we get away from this sometimes too, just because it's easy to, of being this tied to this like concept. But I think when we're doing our jobs well, we'll be hyper tied to this, and we will know when athlete's getting better. And we often get things of like, we don't even feel like she's gotten any better. And then we pull open the data and we're like,
yeah,
like it's almost like confusing. Like, she's gotten a ton better. But I think the other thing to that point about youth is not only are games not the best measurement because they're fatigued, there's so much that goes into that. Also, you are actively jumping levels in the background, which does not happen in college. You go to college and you are at one level. And so it doesn't change. I mean, obviously if you transfer something, but generally it doesn't change year to year. It's like, this is the SEC. This is what it looks like. And so whatever, you're going to do that. But in travel ball, this happens so much that there's not an acknowledgement that kid literally jumped from 14U to first year CU. And they're like, she's not even getting better. It's like, she is getting better, but
yeah, those tools aren't good enough at that level now.
Right. It's just like, and so that's also hard, I think, is that we forget that
she's
process.
Not stuck, so give her time to then make another jump.
Right. And it's like, there's development happening, of course, and we can get into that concept too of like, they're also the youth level is measuring that. We've talked about all of that of like the kid is actively also growing. But I think we forget too that literally we are working with kids who are jumping levels of play.
For sure. I think this is tied to our conversation last week, right? It's like this organic, like stay with a pattern approach at the youth level, overwhelming majority of the time, to try to grow whatever they have as much as possible. And it's not this blanket grow everything. I mean, we see that she's a down ball kid. We see she's mainly an off speed kid. So we keep that within the parameters of what we know she's likely to really be able to accomplish. But we're trying to go up in, general variability, velo, all the things. And it is this ground up approach. And there often isn't an easy way to see its like translation. I do have a really good example, I think, on the college side of how this usually works. We start with assessments where we're like, okay, let's look at her ball flight. We want to make this pitch do this. These are our performance goals. Here's what we need to do in her patterns to be able to get that. And then we really kind of entirely switch into whether or not she's reaching those performance goals and then whether or not they are translating. A huge part of the college game and the consulting piece is the translation. And it's not just because there's always in-game data, not everybody has in-game data, but because we are talking to a coach who is then tracking everyone's, they can come, even if it's manually tracked, oh, her swing and miss rate was 16% yesterday. Like, we're talking to the coach who is tracking this, right? And so that's really where we're working. And now if things are off, we go back into patterns. If command is off, if we're losing break, then we know go into patterns and check. But we stay at the ball flight. I have a great example of how like data steers the ship. Literally, this just happened on the consulting call I had just prior to this podcast. And I think there's a couple layers to it and it's awesome. Okay. So there's a pitcher and that we were discussing, and the coach was saying to me that she is getting a lot of swings and misses and mostly on curve, I think it was, and maybe rise. And he's like, those pitches are really breaking. And we pulled the data and they're not breaking. So this is this subjective, like, these pitches are really breaking a lot, and they're not. They're just like straight, like zero, basically. And I could see for a second, it was sort of like, well, that's not really matching, except literally their swing and miss rate was like over 30%. So then I had to check myself into saying like, well, that's bad. They're not breaking. I'm like, I mean, if her swing and miss rate is 30%, so then I'm like, okay, let's maybe get into the nuances. So I pulled some of our data from our pitch talk where we took the aggregated data from the college season last year. And what we saw is like, she's throwing basically like a 0-1, she's a low velo athlete and a low spin rate athlete. And so we pulled some of that, and the swings and miss rates on that pitch specifically was super high. I'm like, what an interesting thing how data checked us all across the board. At the end of the day, the data that mattered, the 30% swing and miss rate. Right. So it's like, stop making shit up. And I would have, he said like, oh, when I saw the data, maybe we should be going after more break. And I was like, I would say the same thing as you. So this is not a judgment, but should we? So then we pulled, what if we start getting +1s, +2, and boom, swing and miss rate on that data went way down. I'm like, we shouldn't. So I think that's such a great example of like, not just using data to say if we're getting better. At the youth level, we have to really just use this, like, we need more break, more variability, because remember, we need the canvas to just offer as much as possible. And then at the college level, the ultimate thing that matters is that something is effective. It's like, why, right? And so then we use the data to understand exactly why, and to make sure that what we were choosing to do in training was not just based on our experience of what she should be doing more of and what we think she should do, because that's what other athletes have done. So all of us kind of got checked in that system by using a variety of data points. And that's beautiful, right? I mean, I think
that's such an evolution of like, everyone's got to throw the same pitch types and the pitch labels. It's such an evolution of that, where, we know when a kid comes in with 9 pitch types, it's like, oh boy, someone's just put these labels on you. We're not sure what they do. And what you're saying is like, all right, call it whatever you want. The label part's irrelevant. What is it actually doing? It's not doing what we think it should do to be successful. But what ultimately matters is that her whiff rate on that is above average. And like, right. That's critical. That is how you say, okay, maybe that, again, whether it's a curve or rise, label whatever the hell you want, it's the pitch shape that does something very unique and special and results in really good outcomes in terms of getting swings and misses. And like, that's what matters. Not that, she had 7 pitches when she was 10 and now she only has 4. That's the scalability concept.
So now if first of all, if he had not had that information, I probably would have made the same mistake that he was making, which is like, we should be chasing more break. Right? If they hadn't thrown live yet, it's like, everything was bullet, whatever. Everything is bullet. And like slow, low spin rate bullet, right? That's essentially what we were looking at, which everything about that feels to us like cringe,
I know. I feel uncomfortable saying that.
Not, but which is so interesting. But I think also, though, there are athletes where it's like, no, she's either getting hit hard or like everyone's barreling her, whatever. And now we go back into this system of like, okay, let's see what her tools are. Which tool is closest to being something we can leverage, right? And so this gets back into the world that we live in all the time, because it's not just, we've identified she already has the tool. Most athletes are not at that level. You see it more at the college level. There's just reality. They got there for a reason. but most athletes don't have that. And so now there are also athletes, staffs have 8, 9 pitchers now. The bottom 3, 4 are sitting back in mediocre land. I mean, there's just a reality to that. So I think that, with that said, we go back into this world of, I have to plug my computer in, guys, also. I thought it was plugged in, and I just got a thing that says it's about to die.
It's a real,
that would have been terrible.
A real Ash moment.
Yeah,
whatever. Squirrel. Anyway, so we're back in this world. Obviously, I'm going to pick right back up because I know how to bounce from squirrel to squirrel.
Duh.
So we now are back into this world where these bottom 3, 4 pitchers are just average. And now it's the youth level again. So we now are in this world of like, which tool would give us the biggest bang for our buck? Could we add 2 inches to that? Could we give her an off speed? Let's go into her patterns. How can we get her to do more of that? Now we're right back into that world. So I wanted to give that example because it's all still being led by data, but they are different processes. And we do both of them at the college level. The reality is, though, those bottom 3, 4 pitchers, they have a certain time period. And if we can't get enough out of them by a certain time period, they just kind of get pushed to the side by January because that's the name of the game. These coaches have to win. So at the high school level, we just stay in that all the time in that process.
Right. Well, and it's you ebb and flow through it. I think of this, I had a hitter assessment where, her exit velo kind of matched her power output. So, that usually at the youth level, we're going to see some climbs in exit velo over time, and we anticipate kind of jumping. Really, it's like the 70 is like 60 for pitching, or maybe 62 for pitching, where it's like we can get 70 is becoming pretty average. Like we can get maybe a little above average because when I say average, I mean of the pool of athletes we have. So these are athletes training very regularly. So it's above average, but it feels like if you're an athlete and you're training, we can get you to 70, kind of regardless of your power output underneath, and then it starts becoming about this match of efficiency and underlying power. So this is an athlete who's already kind of at that 70 threshold and her power output underneath her engine is below average. So it's kind of like, that's just not something we're going to see go up right now. Now you can still keep building that engine underneath and really working towards that goal. And maybe as we see that tick up, we might see. But it's also, I think, important then that as coaches, we're not just like, there's some data you can watch. So for this athlete, it's like she had certain holes in her swing, like pitch locations that were a little bit of a struggle for her. She hit the ball sort of like with that average exit velocity, the ball was getting elevated too high. It didn't match that. So as she continued to tear up, those balls started getting caught. And so actually this is an athlete where we're bringing down launch angle a little bit. And that's sort of what we're expecting. And so I think it's important, even in that case where it's not just like, it's not as simple as did she hit the ball harder? That sometimes is the goal for people. But for this athlete, and again, this goes to why really understanding like where it comes from, what are we going after? For this athlete, it's like we are going to be tied to, do you hit an inside pitch harder? And does your launch angle start to come down a little bit? That is going to be the measurement of whether the changes we're trying to influence right now in hitting are working. And so the conversation with the coach, the conversation with the athlete cannot get removed from that because that is what we said we're going after. And it's so easy to just be like, we had this conversation all the time where we would say like, she looks great. And, and it's easy to, when you see that athlete hitting in the cage all the time and you're like, oh, she's hitting great. It's like, is she? Based on what? And it's just really going back to making sure we're continuing to check ourselves for that level. And then to your point, Ashley, that what we're saying is good, that we're going after is good, that we're going after. That's something we're always checking with the in-game data and the understanding we have. That goes back all the way to the point of like, what data matters? That we can latch on to random data and say, I want to make a kid throw more spin. I want to make her throw harder. I want to do XYZ. But that has to continue to be tied to what works, in the college level and that component of it. And I think this is the sort of like test, retest loop that everyone kind of needs to be on. And what goes, we've gotten away from now. We always say this, like, obviously I think our systems are good because we're in this model all of the time. And so we know kind of what influences things. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. You want to go after something in a different way. It's fine. What matters is that don't get too removed for too long from whether that is working or not. And I think that's what we fall into as coaches a lot, especially for us who grew up in a world where at most we had video. So like we grew up.
Look at you guys being
coaching.
fancy, having video.
And well, Right View Pro for like 30 minutes before I finished my career, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is like lined up with like Jenny Finch. I'm like, this makes sense because me and Jenny Finch definitely have the same body type, and we should really be going after what she looks like. That makes a lot of sense.
There were kind of two things I had to jot down. I didn't want to forget them. We talk so much about the importance of variability in training, and I think the sort of coach flip of that, the corollary of that is like variability to your eye. And so, we talk so much about it. Somebody looks good, like when someone throws a pitch, I see this a lot just in pitchers, just where my brain usually is. It's like, oh man, she looks a one-step walkthrough. She looks really smooth. Like, maybe she's not the tallest athlete, but she just looks like she coordinates very well. That's great. I can think that all day long. I can feel like that's a good thing. But it's the data that ultimately matters in terms of what she puts on the ball. And so that variability in this context of like, your eye is fine, but you need a variability of sources if your training is variable, right? If all you are teaching is a style, in a lesson model, we're working on this one thing, then sure, your eye is probably fine, but that's also not reality. Like there's so many complexities that go into training the human body that just like the human body from a training standpoint needs variable inputs, needs problems to solve. We need to check the solution to those problems in multiple ways. And so if all you have is your eye, and I can appreciate that, there are lots of instructors and coaches that all they have is their eye, and their eyes are great. I'm certainly not advocating that, a coach who has watched an athlete swing and pitch for a long time doesn't have a great eye. But just as their training should be variable, so should the variability of the sources of is that good or not. That also needs to grow. And then the other thing I kind of was kind of hearing through all of this is it really goes both player and coach. And I keep thinking like, okay, when we say an athlete is getting better, and we have fallen into this trap a lot in our facility. It happens with a lot of our athletes where we're like, she's showing up more, she's going through the warm-ups well, she's paying attention to detail.
Coachable.
She's coachable, right? And what I went to is like, okay, those are better habits, right? So I wrote down like your habits of consistency, your execution, your program prescription, which that falls on us. That's where kind of like the rubber meets the road in terms of, our programming and whether the athlete executes it, is consistent with it. To me, that gets you to your floor. What your ceiling is then is like how you then leverage those really good habits. So we don't want to stop at she shows up consistently, she does the drills correctly, whatever the heck that means. She is, thorough in her warm up. It's like, that's kind of bare minimum, to be honest. So let's not just call that she's better. She has better habits for sure. And I think that the sort of example in coaching is when we have coaches who have great systems of like, we're going to do X, Y, Z. We always do these drills. It's like, that's your floor of some of those better systems. But then how you get to your ceiling is having these multiple sources check your systems. And I think like that's the circular process that we get into with that.
I think that's where the beauty of HQ comes in, because it's like we've even had this conversation with our coaches a lot of like, you have two jobs. Your first job is to sit behind that computer and look at HQ and the trends of your athletes and analyze their data and understand if they're heading in the direction that you are trying to get them, if they're not, why, if they're not. Like, you are the data analyst and tracking their data. That's job number one. Job number two is when they come in the flesh and they're a human in front of you, interact, be a good coach, right? There's this art of coaching, connection, make them love being there. Like, make sure you're celebrating the little things that they're doing. Like, there's this like real in-person type of thing. But the reality is you can't let one influence the other. That's the beauty of consulting, because, on the college side, I don't work with any of the athletes in the flesh. So I just sit behind their data. And it certainly comes up where sometimes like I have to check coaches. They're like, gosh, she's like, they want to pour into somebody because she's such a great kid. And we're approaching, February 3rd. And I have to say like, you got to let her go. Like, it's time to only give her 6% of your capacity, not because she's not a great kid. And I get it. And this is tough, but this is not, your job is to win, and you can't do that. And so I think it's so much easier to have that type of lens when you only see data. And so we ask our coaches to do both. right? It's like you don't take the human element out. I don't need to have the human element necessarily in consulting. They have a coach who's doing that. It's a totally different scenario. But our OGX coaches who are there on a regular basis, they do have to have both. And so what you're saying is when you lean so much into one of just of like connecting with someone, they do things the way you want, they're so coachable, all of this, you could think they're your like shining star. But it is very possible that that shining star, the kid who listens, does all the things, crosses all the T's, dots all the I's, her stuff is mediocre. There's just,
or it's not getting better, or it's not getting better from that. I think that's the thing is like, okay, but let's just make sure that those things, the checking of the boxes is actually making her get better. Because at the end of the day, when someone comes to OGX, our goal is to make them better. It's not just to make sure that they sort of like follow.
What about athletes, which we've all had, who are a little bit rogue and their shit just gets better? Does anyone care?
Great. Sounds great.
No, because it's like what I tell my kids in school, like probably get in trouble at school every once in a while, because if you're never getting in trouble, that means you're always following in line. And I'm telling you, you're never going to do anything great in the world. You are just going to be average if you're always in line and you're always the kid that everyone's like, what a good kid. When it comes to being an athlete, if you want to be great, you gotta go rogue. You gotta color outside the lines.
Right. Well, it's like you gotta have drive, and sometimes that drive it becomes a little bit of like, ooh, yeah. Yes. I don't know if that was the way to do that. And I think obviously if it spills way too much, that's not great either. But it's this balance of those. I was thinking something when you were talking about the like smooth thing, Laura. Is like I think there's no question that when you watch some of the top athletes, meaning this top literally 1%, you watch Nyjah throw, and it's like. Looks like she's barely exerting herself and she throws it at 75. There's an element that when you're that good, there's something like you are just able to just, I made comments when we were at South Carolina, a couple of their kids, I'm like, oh, they're just like smooth. I was holding the pocket radar. I'm like 67. It just looks like they're like barely trying, and there's an element that is definitely true. And there is also an element where there are plenty of kids on the fringe who do very weird things that do not look efficient at all, but are able to have a lot of success because of that. And where we can get, those are the kids that are most likely to get just wrecked in this world, because then we're like, you need to look like Nyjah. That's what smooth and efficient looks like. Except that weird, inefficient pattern, that hitch you see, that arm path you see is actually creating something very unique for that athlete. And if you take that away, that was that athlete's ticket to this level. And so then it becomes about really understanding that particular nuance. And so I think that's where we get into trouble a lot. It's like, of course, to some degree, we want athletes to look smooth and effortless in what they're doing. And but that is just not going to happen.
Ain't happening.
And so there is this element where sometimes like a hitchiness or different, like you watch Ohtani swing and it's very smooth looking. So this doesn't really apply to him. But when you really look at his swing, broke it down, he has got like an arm bar. He's just like able to get into kind of weird in and out of positions that most athletes can't. And so it's like, we could go try to make everyone look like that, but it's just probably not going to work for most athletes. So I think it's just, that's where the eye gets really into trouble, where it's like, maybe I think of like an example where it's like, we're looking at like a lot of the college hitters, and a lot of them have, I think, objectively like too big of moves for the level that they're at. They have, softball is really hard to have a pretty big leg kick for a variety of reasons, not only just the timing, but also the path that the ball comes at. A lot of times with leg kicks, it's very hard for the athlete to hold posture coming out of that. So they start coming up. And when we have people throwing at an up angle and with rise balls and things like that, that's a really hard path to come up. It's also hard to elevate the ball when you're kind of pulling up like that. And so if you're trying to hit for power, those are tough things. But there are some average athletes who we can push to a bucket ahead if we allow them to have a little bit of a bigger move and more momentum, because they need that to get power. And I can't just put them in this high level athlete's bucket and say, you should look like this and let's take your move away because that's going to work. If that athlete's she's not going to go play at the SEC, the one that I'm looking in front, and that might really help her for that. So I could sort of like be like, every athlete needs to have this small move so that you can hit a rise ball at 72. It's like, well, that athlete's never going to face a rise ball at 72. And I need to make the athlete hit the ball harder, and she needs a little more momentum to do that. So I'm going to give her that. And that's going to work fine at the mid-major or Division II level, because she's not going to see that pitch. And so that little hitch that little inefficiency I'm going to give her in her swing doesn't matter. That's not something I'm like chasing here. So I think those like nuances are really important. And it's so easy to get into watching this like, oh, that looks smooth. I mean, we all had, I'm sure, Ashley, you had this experience, but in high school, it's like we all had coaches. I think of pitching, and Laura, probably like same experience for you, where it's like they watched, for us, it was like Jenny Finch or Amanda Scarborough or Kat Osterman, like, whoever was pitching at the time. And then you had some pitching coach that was like, you got to do this move because that's what that is doing. And that's what efficiency looks like. And I think it just gets really dangerous. Not to say you can't play with that, but it better be tied to like, is that doing, like, does it just look better to my eyeball because I like the look of it? Or is that doing what we say it's doing? And I think that's where sometimes I check myself, and it's probably the sessions I'm most bored by watching is when a hitting coach is just like tinkering around with a hitter. And then I'm like, are we going to check this? Like, when do we check this? That's what I want to ask. Like, when do we check that what you're tinkering with is doing something? It's like, can we flip on the machine and see, like, what are you going for here? And does the athlete know what you're going for here? Are we all just saying it like feels and looks better, which I think can be scary. It scares maybe a little. It's sometimes scary, but maybe it's a little.
And I think you have to be cautious about, does that feel better? I think of like a college example of where that athlete's come through a lesson model where the lesson model, its success hinges on the athlete saying that, yes, that was great, or the coach saying, yes, that was great. And so there is this sort of like mutual people pleasing that happens on both sides. And then when they get into, a college BP session and the college coach is saying, does that feel better? I'm going to guess her instinct is to say, yep, feels great, even if it doesn't, because that's what her instinct is.
And you also know what feels better. You're neutral. Your neutral feels better. So I think there's this element of like, right. But is the neutral producing something better? Right? Like, is the neutral producing something better on the ball? So I think you can say like, oh, she feels more comfortable doing this. Like, that's great if it also is producing what we want on the ball. But what if it's not? Shouldn't we also be okay with getting someone to work into something that doesn't feel comfortable because it's not familiar?
My favorite, like, this is something, and I still do this. I'm not saying this is always bad. Like, let's just be clear. There's nothing that's always good or bad. But I think my like favorite thing, and I certainly, when we first started doing lessons, this is something I did all the time because it's what everyone did. But when you are tossing front toss and someone hits it and you're like, that one, like, we have to realize how absurd that is. Like, the idea that a ball could be being hit at you and you could see with your eyeball a 1.5 second movement that they made some sort of change in there. Like, that is absurd. Now, if it seemed harder hit, you threw inside and that was a struggle for her. Like, you have hit tracks running. And again, you don't have to be like tied to everything, and you can see that the outcome was better. And you're like, yes, that's the outcome we're going for. That's what this drill looks like when executed. Like, that's the feedback you're giving. But when there is no external feedback and we're just like, yeah, I'm like, you saw nothing there. And we just all think that that's what we're supposed to be doing. It just is like, and sometimes we don't even know. I found this so interesting. We don't even know. We think we know. Like, there was a kid and she did barrel the ball pretty well, but her exit velo was generally low. This was a few weeks ago or like a while ago. But the sound sounded good, because it was like, she did kind of barrel it and her bat was loud.
I'm thinking like the ball in the catcher's glove.
And James was like, ooh, that kid really swings it. And I said, no, she doesn't. Like, her exit velo was below average. It just sounded good. And so it's like sometimes even the things we think we're trained to as coaches, you start to prove yourself wrong when you start to like really see the numbers. And so you just have to be really cautious of that. But I think being really clear of what does good look like here and trying to remove that from just like some random thing I say looks good, and then I think you start to train a little bit better too. Like I said, that for that athlete, we want to start seeing the launch angle come down. So, okay, maybe I will front toss and say like, yeah, that's the one, that's what we're going for, because she's able to have the outcome we want type of thing. But I think doing that just based on like some random body adjustment. I'm like, you literally probably were closing your eyes because there's a ball being hit at you. Like, it's just hilarious to think that you saw anything in that. I mean, I did this all the time, but it's just like, it's my favorite.
I still do it when there's the pop, like I said, the pop and the
you're like,
and you're like,
no, it'd be cool.
A terrible pitch.
You ever see those like influencers? They do like, I don't know, like makeup or something, and they watch old videos of themselves, or like, here is my skincare routine, and then they go back on and they're like, cringe. That was like of themselves. That would be so awesome to have like video of yourself coaching like 10 years ago and just watch yourself like what you did
do.
instead.
It's like we're checking umpires. Like, what will be cool if we have launch pads is that we're like, okay, hitting coach, go in front toss. We're going to have the launch pad running. We're going to have ball flight running, but we're not going to tell you what any of it is. And then you say which is good and bad, and let's check. And I bet we're not great at it.
Evil.
I bet we're not great at it. Yeah. So I think it's just
like a carnival game. I'm in for it.
All right. Well, on that note, we got to wrap it up because we got places to be today and things to do, data to look at. But we will, I think next week we're going to maybe talk about force fights and some of the stuff that we're seeing with the force fight data for pitchers specifically. And then I know that we referenced September 1st, and I did get some outreach that the people do want to hear us talk about it. But I will say sometimes... No, outreach. They want us to talk about it, not outreach. Like, we will get outrage also.
I don't condone people getting angry, obviously, but I like passion, one way or the other.
Yeah. So we will come to, I promise we will talk about it, but sometimes we're not as curmudgeon-y as we seem in here. So sometimes I was the one that was like, let's maybe have a little breather from I did, appreciate our social media. Put a caption of me from last week that says,
call passion. So tomato.
I call it sarcastic and pragmatic, but whatever, man. Whatever,
So in 2 weeks, maybe ish, we will come back to the September 1st topic because I do think it's an interesting topic and people want to hear it. And I'm not forgetting that it's there. So if you're listening and you want to hear us, I promise we'll come back to it. It just wasn't made for this week. Yeah, stay tuned. All right, subscribe, like, review, whatever Paul tells me to tell people to do. Send it to people, do all of that so we can keep making this. And until next week, see you then.